The morning of August 14th, 2021 started like every other Saturday on Willowbrook Circle. Sprinklers ticking, mourning doves on the power lines, the smell of someone's bacon drifting through the screen doors. And then the cruisers. 3 of them rolling slow down the cul-de-sac, lights off, no urgency, because by now every officer in the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department knew this address, knew this street, knew exactly what they were going to find. A quiet black man standing on his own porch, doing nothing wrong. Master Sergeant James Elwood Calloway, retired United States Army, 28 years of service, stood in his front doorway holding a mug of coffee he hadn't taken a single sip from yet. He looked at the cruisers. He looked at Deputy Andre Rollins, who had the decency to look at his shoes. And then James Calloway did something nobody expected. He smiled. Not because anything was funny, because he had been waiting for this exact morning for 14 months. And the woman who made that call, the woman who had dialed 911 26 times in 14 months, had just made her last mistake. Let me tell you about Willowbrook Circle. It sits in the hills just east of Clemens, North Carolina, a small, unassuming suburb about 12 minutes outside of Winston-Salem. Not fancy, not poor, just the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from their driveways and bring casseroles when somebody's sick. The houses were built in the late 1980s, brick fronts, 2-car garages, deep backyards that butted up against a tree line of white oak and sweet gum. The kind of trees that turned gold in October and dropped their leaves in a single weekend, giving every kid on the block an excuse to jump in the pile. In the summer of 2020, when James Calloway moved in, Willowbrook Circle had 11 households. He knew 6 of his neighbors by first name within the first 2 weeks. The Pattersons next door brought him sweet tea through the fence. Old Mr. Kowalski across the street came over just to look at James's 1971 Ford Bronco and spent 3 hours talking about carburetors. It was the kind of street you moved to so you could exhale. James had bought the house at 214 Willowbrook Circle in April of that year. White shutters, a basketball hoop in the driveway he put up for his grandkids, a flagpole in the front yard, centered, plumb, exactly 42 inches from the property line, flying a clean American flag, and just below it, a 3rd Infantry Division banner. It was peaceful, it was his, he had earned it. And for about 4 months, everything was fine. Master Sergeant James Elwood Calloway was 61 years old when he retired to Clemens, North Carolina. He was born in Greensboro, the 4th of 5 children of a man named Robert Calloway who worked the floor at a textile mill for 31 years without missing a shift. James enlisted in the United States Army at age 19 in 1979. He served until 2007, 28 years, 3 combat deployments, Panama in 1989, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait during Desert Storm in 1990 and 91. And Baghdad, Iraq in 2004 at age 44, when most men his rank were counting down to retirement, James Calloway volunteered for a 4th deployment because, as he told his youngest daughter, "My boys are out there." He served with the 3rd Infantry Division, the Rock of the Marne. He was a master sergeant over a mortar platoon, the kind of NCO who remembered every man's mother's name, who could strip and reassemble an M224 mortar system blindfolded in under 2 minutes. Who also kept a worn King James Bible in his breast pocket and read it in the glow of a headlamp when the camp went dark. He came home to a wife named Gloria and 3 kids who'd grown up while he was gone. He spent his retirement the way most good men do, quietly. He coached youth basketball at his church. He fixed neighbors' lawn mowers without being asked. He grew a modest vegetable garden in the backyard, tomatoes, butter beans, collard greens, and he always sent a grocery bag full of it down the street. Gloria had passed in 2017 after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. James had sat at her bedside every single day for 41 days. He had held her hand when she went. That's the wound you need to know about, not the shrapnel scar on his left forearm from a mortar misfire outside Baghdad, not the tinnitus that rang in his right ear when the night was too quiet. It was Gloria and the garden she had planted with him, and the yellow rose bush she put in herself outside the kitchen window the week they moved in together 30 years ago. He transplanted it from their old house. He brought it with him to Willowbrook Circle, planted it himself along the side of the house, under the kitchen window, right where Gloria would have wanted it. That rose bush is important, remember it. She moved in on a Thursday in October 2020. Number 216 Willowbrook Circle, the house directly to James Calloway's right, had been vacant for 7 months after the previous owners relocated to Florida. It was a handsome house. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a sunroom that caught the afternoon light perfectly. The moving truck arrived at 7 a.m. The truck was followed by a pearl-white 2020 Lexus RX 450h that pulled up onto the freshly sodded lawn, not the driveway, the lawn, and sat there while the driver took a phone call. That was the first thing James noticed from his porch. The driver eventually stepped out. She was somewhere in her late 40s, dressed in athleisure wear and large square sunglasses, gesturing at the movers like she was conducting an orchestra. Brenda Colleen Harwick, recently divorced, originally from Charlotte, recently appointed as Vice President of Community Standards for the Willowbrook HOA, a position that everyone on the block would later confirm. She had campaigned for herself at a meeting attended by exactly 4 people. Brenda Harwick had spent 17 years married to a commercial real estate attorney named Patrick Harwick, and somewhere in those 17 years had developed the unshakable belief that she was the most important person in any room she entered. Her social media profiles listed her occupation as community advocate and lifestyle curator. She had a lifestyle blog called The Harwick Standard with 1,200 followers, mostly bots. She drove with a Bluetooth earpiece permanently installed in her left ear. She wore her HOA lanyard to the grocery store. James walked over that first afternoon, extended his hand, said, "Welcome to the neighborhood, I'm James, 214. Brenda looked at his hand, looked at the flagpole in his yard, looked at him. "You're going to want to double-check the HOA guidelines on flagpole placement," she said, and went back inside. She didn't shake his hand. She never did. 3 weeks after Brenda Harwick moved in, James Calloway received his first HOA violation notice. The flagpole. According to Section 4(7)(b) of the Willowbrook Circle HOA covenants, a document Brenda had apparently memorized cover to cover, flagpoles in front yards required written HOA approval prior to installation. James had moved in 4 months before Brenda joined the HOA board. The flagpole had been there, approved in writing by the previous HOA president since May. James found the notice paperclip to a takeout menu stuck in his door. No signature, no meeting date, a $75 fine. He went next door, knocked 3 times, waited. Brenda opened the door with her Bluetooth in her ear mid-conversation and held up one finger like James was an interruption. He waited. He was a patient man. "Brenda," he said when she finally ended the call, "I've got the original approval letter right here, dated May 6th, signed by your predecessor, Roger Totham." She barely glanced at the paper. Roger didn't have the authority to approve structures over 48 inches. The pole appears to be 52 inches. The fine stands. 52 inches is legal under federal law, James said. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, 2005. Brenda's expression didn't change. "This isn't a federal matter, sir. This is a community standards matter. If you'd like to appeal, you're welcome to attend the next HOA meeting." "When is it?" "It was last Tuesday." She closed the door. James stood on her porch for a moment. Then he walked home, made a note in a yellow legal pad on his kitchen counter. October 29, 2020. HOA violation notice. Flagpole, $75, disputed, and poured himself a glass of sweet tea. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be completely reasonable with someone who wasn't interested in reason at all? Someone who held a little bit of power and used it like a weapon? Drop a comment and tell me what happened, because I think a lot of you know exactly how James felt standing on that porch. He did not yet know what was coming. None of them did. What followed over the next 12 months was a campaign, not the disorganized aggression of a difficult neighbor. A campaign, systematic, patient, escalating. It began with the HOA violations. Between November 2020 and March 2021, Brenda Harwick filed 11 separate HOA complaints against 214 Willowbrook Circle. The flagpole, the basketball hoop, she argued it created undue noise disturbance from the grandkids playing. The vegetable garden, she submitted a complaint claiming it violated aesthetic guidelines, despite no such guideline existing. The color of James's mailbox. The placement of his recycling bins, which she photographed at 6:15 a.m. on collection day before he had time to bring them in. 11 complaints, not one of them upheld upon review. Then came the calls. The first call to the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department came on December 3, 2020. 9:47 p.m. Brenda reported a suspicious individual in the Willowbrook Circle cul-de-sac. The responding deputy found James Calloway taking his dog, a 9-year-old beagle named Corporal, for an evening walk on his own street, in his own neighborhood. James handed the deputy his ID calmly. He had it ready. "Have a good night, deputy," he said. He wrote it down when he got home. December 3, 9:47 p.m. Suspicious person call, responded Deputy L. Torres. Duration 8 minutes. Reason walking dog. The second call came 2 weeks later. Third call, New Year's Eve. She reported suspicious activity because James had a few family members over for a small dinner. The deputies arrived to find 6 people eating cake. By March 2021, the calls numbered 10. The deputies, most of them, knew what was happening. Deputy Andre Rollins, a 10-year veteran of the department, pulled James aside one evening in February. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I want you to know we're documenting every one of these." James nodded. "So am I, deputy." Then there was the night of April 4, 2021, a cold Sunday, temperature in the low 40s, when James came outside to find his truck keyed. His 2004 Ford F-250, the one he'd owned for 14 years. 3 long scratches, door handle to tailgate, driver's side. He took 11 photographs. He filed a police report, case number 2020-10-40412, Forsyth County. He noted in his legal pad, no witnesses. Brenda Harwick's Lexus was the only vehicle on the street at the time, keying estimated between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. He didn't confront her, he didn't raise his voice. He just bought a new security camera, a Realink 4K wide-angle motion activated, and mounted it on the eave of his garage, angled to cover the truck, his front yard, and a clear view of the driveway of 216. He already had 2 cameras, now he had 3. Here's what nobody knew at the time. James Calloway had been recording from the moment Brenda Harwick filed that first flagpole complaint, continuously, in high definition. Every call to the sheriff, every HOA notice taped to his door, every time Brenda walked past his yard with her phone raised taking photographs, every time. He had a system, a dated archive, categorized files on an external hard drive he kept locked in his gun safe. He was a master sergeant. Organization wasn't a habit for James Calloway, it was a reflex. By July 2021, Brenda Harwick had called the sheriff's department 23 times. 23 calls over 8 months, suspicious persons, noise complaints, alleged traffic violations in the cul-de-sac. One call claiming James was brandishing a firearm. He had been cleaning his legally owned shotgun inside his own garage with the garage door open, a door that opened onto his own property. Deputies responded each time, found nothing, filed reports, drove away. And then came the morning of July 19, 2021. James was inside in the kitchen reading his Bible with the coffee going and the radio on low, an old Duke Ellington station he'd found on FM. The kitchen window was open. He could smell the roses. He heard it before he saw it. A rhythmic thudding sound, metal on dirt, over and over. He walked to the side of the house. Brenda Harwick was standing just inside the property line, his property line with a flat-faced garden spade. She had already uprooted 4 of the 8 rose canes. They were lying in the grass, roots exposed, drying in the July heat. She was working on the 5th. James stood there for a long moment. He didn't shout, he didn't move. "What are you doing?" he said, quiet, even. Brenda didn't look up. Section 9.2 of the HOA covenants. Plantings within 18 inches of shared property lines must be approved in writing. These are encroaching. "Those roses have been there since April," James said, "and that's not the property line." "My survey says it is." "Your survey is wrong." "She uprooted the fifth cane." James looked at those roses in the grass, looked at the roots, the pale, exposed roots drying out in the heat. He thought about Gloria. He thought about the day she put them in 20-some years ago, her hands covered in garden soil, laughing about something he'd said. He could not remember what he'd said. He had tried for years to remember. He went inside. He closed the door. He sat down at the kitchen table, and he didn't move for a very long time. His daughter Keisha called that evening. He told her what happened. She started to cry. He told her everything was fine. He told her not to worry. He wasn't lying, because he had decided, sitting at that table in the July heat, that it was time to stop documenting and start moving. If you think James Calloway was going to let this go, you've never met a man like James Calloway. Here's what nobody in Willowbrook Circle knew about James Elwood Calloway. He wasn't just an infantryman. He wasn't just a mortar platoon master sergeant. In his final 6 years of active service, 2001 to 2007, James Calloway had been reassigned to the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, as a senior special agent. He had investigated procurement fraud. He had interviewed suspects under caution. He had worked alongside the FBI's National Security Branch on 2 separate cases, one of which resulted in a federal conviction. He knew exactly how to build a case. He had spent 6 years doing it for the United States government. His best friend since Fort Benning in 1983 was a man named Colonel Theodore Teddy Broussard, now retired and currently practicing as a civil rights attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina. Teddy Broussard had clerked for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. He had litigated 3 landmark fair housing cases. When James called him in July 2021, Teddy said 3 words. "Send me everything." Everything was considerable. The legal pad, 19 months of entries, dates, times, deputy badge numbers, duration of each stop, stated reason for each call, 23 calls, not one resulting in any citation, charge, or finding against James Calloway, not one. The camera archive, 847 gigabytes of footage, organized by date, indexed, every HOA notice delivery captured on video. 3 incidents of Brenda Harwick photographing his property while walking past. The night of the truck keying inconclusive angle, but it showed Brenda's Lexus leaving her driveway at 11:23 p.m. and returning at 11:51 p.m., with no recorded movement in between. The police reports, case number 2020-10-40412 and 6 others. The HOA violation notices, 11 of them, cross-referenced against the actual covenants. 8 were factually inaccurate. 3 cited sections that didn't exist. And then there was the property survey. James had hired a licensed surveyor, a man named Dave Pittman from Pittman Land Services in Winston-Salem, the morning after the roses were destroyed. Pittman arrived with his equipment, spent 4 hours on the property, and produced a certified plat confirming that the rose bush location was 11 inches inside James's property line. Brenda Harwick had trespassed. She had destroyed private property, on camera, with 30 seconds of footage that showed her stepping clearly over the survey stakes James had placed months ago, small orange flags barely visible in the grass. Small orange flags in the grass, planted in February when a neighbor who'd moved to Florida warned James in a text message that the new woman at 216 has been measuring everyone's yards. Chekhov's gun right there in the grass. Teddy Broussard filed suit in Forsyth County Superior Court on August 3, 2021. The complaint ran to 41 pages. Racial harassment under North Carolina's Fair Housing Act, criminal trespass, destruction of personal property, the rose bush replacement value plus sentimental damages argued at length, tortious interference. The HOA complaints had temporarily affected James's ability to sell his truck, which a prospective buyer had backed out of purchasing after finding the open HOA dispute in a title search. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. And one more thing. Teddy Broussard had a friend at the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. He made a call. It turned out that Brenda Harwick, who had been selling homes in Mecklenburg County since 2018, had 3 pending ethics complaints from former clients. Nothing had moved on them until Teddy made a call. The 27th call hadn't happened yet, but James knew it was coming. He and Teddy had discussed it. All they needed was one more call, one more documented, time-stamped, officer responded, report-generated harassment call after the lawsuit was filed. They didn't have to wait long. August 14, 2021, a Saturday. The air was already thick by 7 a.m., the particular humidity of a Carolina August that makes every breath feel secondhand. The sun was up but still soft, filtering through the white oaks, throwing long shadows across the cul-de-sac. James Calloway was on his front porch with his coffee at 7:10 a.m. when Brenda Harwick, who had been served with the civil lawsuit 11 days earlier, and had responded by posting a 4-paragraph statement on her lifestyle blog calling James a bully and a political agitator, called the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department for the 27th time. She reported at 7:09 a.m. a suspicious man loitering on Willowbrook Circle. The man was James Calloway on his porch, drinking coffee. 3 cruisers arrived at 7:24 a.m. Deputy Andre Rollins stepped out of the lead car. He'd been on this street more times than he could count. He looked at James on the porch. He looked at his clipboard. "Mr. Calloway," he said quietly, "you know the protocol." "I do," James said, and he handed over his ID before Rollins could ask. He also handed over something else, a folded piece of paper. That's a copy of an active civil complaint filed in Forsyth County Superior Court. Case number 21 CVS 4801. The plaintiff is me. The defendant lives at 216. He nodded toward Brenda's house. This call is documented as the 27th in 14 months. My attorney asked me to hand that to you personally and ask that the responding officer's body camera footage be preserved. Rollins looked at the paper, looked at James, looked at the porch, the coffee, the flag on the pole above them both. "Yes, sir," he said. 2 things happened simultaneously on the morning of August 14, 2021, that Brenda Harwick did not know about. At 7:31 a.m., while deputies were standing in James's driveway, a process server from the office of Browsard and Associates was approaching Brenda's front door with additional paperwork. An emergency motion for a harassment injunction, filed the evening before and granted at 9 p.m. by a Forsyth County Superior Court judge named the Honorable Patricia Sims. And at 7:34 a.m., a photographer from the Winston-Salem Journal arrived at the end of Willowbrook Circle, not because anyone had tipped them off that morning, because Teddy Browsard had sent a press advisory the week before, noting that a civil rights lawsuit involving 27 police calls against a decorated Black Army veteran was pending in Forsyth County, and that the next call to the sheriff would be documented in real time. Brenda Harwick opened her door in a sage green bathrobe, coffee in hand, expecting to watch deputies inconvenience her neighbor one more time. She found a process server. "Brenda Colleen Harwick, you are being served with an emergency injunction, case 21 CVS 4801, ordering you to cease and desist all contact with the plaintiff at 214 Willowbrook Circle, including but not limited to HOA complaints, law enforcement calls, and physical presence on the plaintiff's property. You are directed to appear." She slammed the door. It didn't help. The Winston-Salem Journal photographer was already working. The headline that ran the following Wednesday read, "Black veteran says neighbor called police on him 27 times. Court orders her to stop." The Associated Press picked it up by Friday. By the following Monday, it had been read 2.3 million times. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Department, facing the sudden public scrutiny of 2 years of call logs, opened an internal review. They counted the calls. They reviewed the reports. They interviewed the responding deputies. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission, whose wheels had been slowly turning since Teddy's call in July, accelerated its investigation into Brenda Harwick's license. The 3 pending ethics complaints became one consolidated inquiry. Her broker was notified. The HOA board of Willowbrook Circle, 4 people who had mostly ignored all of this, held an emergency meeting on August 19 and voted 3-1 to remove Brenda Harwick from her position as Vice President of Community Standards. She was the one dissenting vote. The civil suit proceeded through Forsyth County Superior Court. Teddy Browsard argued it with the quiet, methodical precision of a man who had spent 30 years preparing for exactly this kind of case. On November 8, 2021, Judge Patricia Sims entered judgment in favor of James Elwood Calloway. Total damages awarded, $414,000. That included $85,000 for the destruction of personal property and associated sentimental damages, the rose bush, $210,000 for racial harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress, documented across 27 incidents, $62,000 for tortious interference relating to the truck sale, $57,000 in legal fees. Brenda Harwick did not have $414,000. She had a home equity line she'd been living on since the divorce. Her attorney's fees had already exceeded $90,000. On December 2, 2021, she listed 216 Willowbrook Circle for sale. The moving truck came on a Tuesday in February 2022. Cold morning, the kind of February cold that sits low to the ground and doesn't apologize. The truck backed into the driveway of 216 Willowbrook Circle at 8 a.m., and two men spent 4 hours loading it. Nobody came outside to watch. Mr. Kowalski from across the street glanced through his front window and let the curtain fall. The Pattersons stayed inside. Even Corporal the Beagle, 9 years old, going gray around the muzzle, sat at the edge of James's yard and watched without barking. James himself sat on his back porch. He drank coffee. He read 2 chapters of Deuteronomy. He listened to the oak trees creak in the February wind. When the truck pulled away at 12:30 p.m., Brenda Harwick drove behind it in the pearl-white Lexus. She did not look at number 214. Nobody waved. The cul-de-sac went quiet. The particular quiet of a street after a long, bad thing is finally over. The quiet that has some relief in it, and some heaviness too, because the bad thing happened and the time it took will not come back. James sat on his back porch for a while after that, holding his coffee mug with both hands, looking at the side of the house at the bare patch of ground where the rose bush had been. He thought about Gloria. Brenda Colleen Harwick relocated to Raleigh. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission suspended her real estate license for 18 months, effective March 2022, citing a pattern of conduct unbecoming a licensed broker. She did not return to real estate after the suspension lifted. Her lifestyle blog, The Harwick Standard, went dark in January 2022. The last post, published October 2021, had 6,000 comments. The majority were not kind. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Department adopted a new policy in early 2022 requiring a supervisory review of any address receiving more than 5 calls within a calendar year from the same reporting party. The policy is sometimes informally called, by deputies who don't use the name in official settings, the Calloway Protocol. James Calloway used a portion of his settlement to endow a small scholarship at his church, the Gloria Me Calloway Memorial Scholarship, for young men and women from the congregation pursuing military service or public safety careers. The first recipient was a 19-year-old named Marcus Webb, who enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in June 2022. In the spring of 2022, James replanted the rose bush. He did it himself on a Saturday morning in April, with his oldest granddaughter Amara helping him. 8 new canes, same variety as Gloria's, a climbing yellow rose called Graham Thomas. He set them along the side of the house, under the kitchen window, right where they belonged. He planted them 11 inches inside his property line. He marked the spot with small orange survey flags. The new neighbors at 216 Willowbrook Circle moved in that June. A young couple, a schoolteacher named Dominique and her husband Terrell, who worked for the city parks department. They introduced themselves the day the truck arrived, shook James's hand, asked if he had any tips about the neighborhood. "It's a good street," James said, "good people." Terrell noticed the rose bush along the side of the house, said it was beautiful. "It belonged to my wife," James said. "She had a talent for growing things. By August it was blooming. You know, people ask me sometimes why these stories matter. Why spend 35 minutes on a neighborhood dispute? Why not talk about something bigger?" But here's the thing, folks. The neighborhood is where it starts. It's where most of us actually live, not in headlines or courtrooms or history books, but on our streets next to our neighbors in the quiet spaces between our fences. And what happens on those streets tells you something true about who we are and what we actually believe. James Calloway didn't need a parade. He didn't need the cameras, though they helped. He didn't need anyone to agree with him or validate him or tell him he was right. He just needed a legal pad, a camera, a good friend, and 28 years' worth of patience trained into him by the United States Army. He had all four. Now let me leave you with this, because I think it's the real story underneath the story. There are people in this world who confuse silence for weakness, who mistake dignity for defeat, who look at a quiet man living a quiet life and see someone they can push around. They don't understand that some people are quiet not because they can't fight, but because they've already seen enough fighting to know when a fight is worth having. James Calloway waited, he documented, he let the evidence speak. He let the legal system, imperfect as it is, slow as it is, do its work. And when the moment came, he was ready, because he had always been ready. Because a man who spent 28 years serving this country doesn't stop being a soldier when he takes off the uniform. He just finds a different battlefield. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man. Never mistake patience for permission. Never mistake dignity for defeat. And if you're ever tempted to pick a fight with a veteran who has spent his whole life doing the right thing, understand that he has already thought through every scenario. He has already made every calculation. He is already 3 moves ahead. You don't know who you're dealing with, but eventually a court of law will. James Calloway knew that. He just waited for everyone else to figure it out. Now, before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a neighbor like Brenda Harwick? Have you ever had to stand your ground in your own home, your own yard, your own neighborhood? Drop it in the comments, because every one of those stories deserves to be told. If this one moved you, share it, not for the algorithm, for the neighbor who needs to hear it. And we'll see you next time. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.